Greece for this year, for the Z Day. Greece is in the spotlight of the economic crisis all the last years. And a lot of people here, watching Zeitgeist, feel that you refer especially to us. What is your view about what is going on in our country the last years?
Oh, it's terrible because there's a micro and a macro kind of phenomenon that occurs with our economic system. Yeah. The micro is the class structure within a country. So you have the lower, middle to upper class. And it's the middle and lower class, the ones that always get the short end of the stick. It's just the way the system is. The system is organized based on advantage, and as many theorists have actually said, you have this propensity of what they call socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. There's too big to fail, just countries are too big to fail as well. And that brings me to the macro level, where you have the United States and China and Russia and the large empires, pseudo-empires. These countries are not susceptible to the same things the smaller countries are, such as Greece or Argentina, or the many other countries that have had periodic debt collapse because of credit expansion and all these things. So Greece isn't a rare case in this. I mean, if you go back and look at the history of Europe and what's happened over the past 3 or 4 decades, it's been a cyclical problem. It's just gotten a little bit worse now overall because the total cumulative debt on the planet continues to grow. So let me return to my original premise that we mentioned before this started. There's more debt in existence than there is money, and that means bankruptcy is inevitable, both for the individual, the lower class, and the lower class countries, which Greece would consider a lower class country. It's not poor, but it's not a super wealthy country. It's susceptible, it's small, it takes loans from international institutions, and it starts this chain reaction, just as we saw actually most notably in Latin America. Some of the worst austerity and structural adjustment policies were done in Latin America, and really very much ravaged that culture, and it puts them in the position that they are today. The ethic of this is that it attempts to sanctify that the financial system is legitimate, because there's no reason for Greece to have done what it did. I mean, there's no reason for it to have been in such debt or for it to have gone through the austerity and the problems that it did. And frankly, it's a completely violent thing that's been going on for government to sanction this and to participate in the world financial institutions, because the world financial institutions aren't real either. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, they are taking money from other collective organizations, other collective countries, like the United States, which is one of the biggest controllers of it. And they make money out of nothing, and then they loan it to countries and put them in debt, and then they force them to pay more money back than often their GDP even creates. Like this is the case in many Latin American countries specifically. Literally more money is paid out servicing debt than they're actually taking in, which is crazy, which is, it's hard not to look at it from the standpoint of one very large-scale exploitative move. Just as you have a poor person, maybe exploited in a sweatshop somewhere, you know what I mean? Just if you have a lower-class individual that is in debt and they have to work someplace they don't like or for very low wages. A lot of these countries that have been put in this position, not necessarily Greece, you see that transnational corporations will go and move in when they're very, very vulnerable. This is, again, it's not as much prevalent to Greece. But
like IMF, you think a transnational organization?
Well, IMF is more of an international banking institution, but transnational, I mean like corporations, like large-scale commercial corporations, yes. Textile industries and energy industries. Textiles have been probably the most notable. So, and the numerous theorists have talked about this. So countries in a great deal of debt, they take on loans, they go through austerity, and they're vulnerable, and suddenly a big textile industry moves in and exploits the labor for 50 cents an hour. It's a chain reaction, and suddenly that entire country becomes somewhat subservient to the external world. And that is precisely the definition of debt bondage and slavery. The oldest form of slavery on the planet is debt bondage. It goes back 5,000 to 6,000 years at a minimum, based on recorded history. Even before abject slavery, debt bondage was, and it's still in existence today, unfortunately. About 27 million slaves exist in the world today, based mostly on debt bondage. That was, by the way, more slaves than any time in human history. We've had population increase, of course, so it's not the same percentage terms. And that same rationale applies to what the countries go through, because it trickles down. And I haven't looked at what has happened as far as the exploitative processes with Greece, But I'm sure that in the bowels of the IMF and the World Bank and other lending countries, they look at Greece as something that they're trying to take advantage of and extract their money from. And they rationalize it that way. They're not saying, let's go exploit Greece. They're saying, well, we need to get our money back. How are we going to do it? Let's get these industries in there. Let's force them to lower all their standards for their workers. Let's remove their welfare systems, make them even more vulnerable. So this is what's happened. So I mean, it's a violent pattern. And the sad thing is, these people in power don't realize what it actually means. They don't realize. They just see it as business, and it's real lives that have been destroyed. I know that's a continual problem. And it'll be, if it's not Greece or Argentina, it'll be somewhere else. It's just going to keep moving along because that's what the debt system does. I would say, as an activist, the first thing that could do as a step-by-step, back to your question about transition, and many things I could say, but removing the debt system, forcing at least, there has to be a certain allowance where debt forgiveness becomes obvious, where you're not going to torture an individual or a country with this anymore once it's clear that they can't do it. You have to have debt forgiveness, which used to be more popular, believe it or not, the Jubilee, debt Jubilee. They even talk about it in very, very ancient texts because this is a long-standing problem. I will say one thing about debt, just to clarify why there's more debt than money, is because there's interest charged on it, right? Once you charge interest on loaned money, and again, all money comes into existence from loans, you can pay the loan back, but how are you going to pay the interest if all the money that's in existence was loaned at interest? Meaning, I loan you $1,000 and I charge you 10% on it. You can pay me back the $1,000, but you actually owe me $1,100. And when you stretch that across the entire society, you always have more debt in existence than money. So I hope anyone that hears that understands the mathematical reality. And all that does is move money to the upper classes. It's taking all of that money and bankrupting people, taking their assets. That's what banks do when you fail. Obviously, it's different for a country, but that's what happens with the individual. So it's a completely classist and detrimental, manipulative, and corrupt process. And yet we accept it as normality. People walk into a bank and take a loan. They think it's normal. It's not. It's a terribly corrupt phenomenon.
Yes. I have heard you in some interviews that you are very fond of direct democracy, referendums. You believe that the people should have the power.
I'm sorry, go on though.
Yeah. We had a very famous referendum in the last summer here in Greece against the austerity measures from our left coalition government. And the Greek people said no with a big percentage.
Yep.
But the Greek government, having pressure from their national committees, had to say yes to the austerity measures. So, do you strongly believe that people really have the power to take the fate in their hands? Because this is an example that whatever people is saying, what has to be done, it has to be done.
Well, in the current circumstance, it's very limited. So referendums are probably the closest thing, and they're very minor, really, when it comes to direct democracy. And the fact that, as you just said, they're not respected, well, what can you do? It goes to show that this kind of idea of rights and liberties and democracy seems to be more of a privilege to society, doesn't it? Yes. It seems like the society, most countries sort of allow a certain degree of it when they think it's okay, which goes to show just how bad power has become and how tolerant people have become too. There's a colossal misunderstanding. People become accustomed to these things, and then time goes on, and then they wonder why things have gotten so bad. Because I'll put it bluntly, in any kind of market-driven society where property values and again, the ethic of competition and exploitation and all these things that have been going on, within that structure, how do you engage democracy? Because it can all be bought, first of all. And second of all, money will be the bridge of everything. So the reason that Greece probably caved is because of their financial debts, and they're probably going to be, well, clearly because of their financial debts, but it had ramifications for their economy deeper. They're being threatened deeply about other things that happened in their economy, and it's only going to get worse for them if they didn't, and they're backed into a corner because of those pressures. So within that, within that architecture, you can't have a real democracy. Now, I won't go so far to say that it doesn't exist and we shouldn't think about it or try, because obviously we should. We have to do whatever we can. But until people realize that in a market economy, you're only as free as your purchasing power is, and your contribution to society is exactly the way they talk about it in economics, which is through your money. That's what they say in traditional economic theory. You vote with your dollar, right? That's what they claim is the democracy of economics, right? Well, that goes the other direction, doesn't it? Because if you have lots of money, then you can vote to manipulate democracy. You can have lots of money, and you can make decisions based on your self-interest and control democracy with that same money. So if you have those positions of advantage, you can do whatever you want. And you're also, as I said before, going to cave very rapidly to economic interests that are going to interfere with your work. And it's the first priority of any politician is to preserve its industries. That's what creates its jobs. That's why all politicians talk about jobs first and foremost at this point in time. And the only way they can do that is to make sure that they are in concert with the dominant corporate powers in their country or in the world. And that's the root of the corruption in general. So there's a limit to it, and that's why we have to look beyond it. I don't believe in the political system as it exists today whatsoever. That's why I advocate a grassroots organization that I do. I don't think lobbying politicians is going to do much of anything, which makes it that much more difficult.